This is the second part of my review of The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Part 2 videos are less direct reviews of books and more a deeper look at some of the themes and ideas in a book that I feel are worth discussing. As a result, this video will contain spoilers, both for this book and another of Gaiman's books, Coraline. You can check out my spoiler-free thoughts on The Ocean at the End of the Lane as a whole in Part 1 here. During the prologue, as the narrator is wandering around his old neighborhood, he muses to himself. Childhood memories are sometimes covered and obscured beneath the things that come later, like childhood toys forgotten at the bottom of a crammed adult closet, but they are never lost for good. Were the novel to have a thesis statement, this would be it. The central themes in the framing story are built around the idea of uncovering the stuff at the bottom of the closet and looking over it again, sometimes with warm nostalgia and sometimes with a sense of bewilderment, unsure what it was about the thing that ever held your attention as a kid. This concept of the disconnect with your childhood self is the most upfront theme in the actual prose. It comes up frequently in the narration, simply from the main character being an adult and describing the world as he experienced it as a child, but it also drives deeper textual themes of the book as a whole. The story of the narrator's past that he's forgotten is by its nature fantastical, and it's revealed at the end that him forgetting is through a trick of magic. But it's treated as any regular sort of memory that someone might stumble over and realize it's something they hadn't thought about in years, like remembering a song out of the blue you hadn't heard since elementary school. This is most apparent during the more magical parts of the story. The real meat of the book starts off after the narrator meets the Hemstocks, who run the farm at the bottom of the lane and are themselves magical beings loosely adapted from the triple goddess of neo-paganism, the three phases of the moon in the form of the maiden, the mother, and the crone. Their farm itself is a place of magic, with a duck pond that's actually an ocean and a monster that follows the narrator home inside his foot. None of this phases the narrator, though. He's more frightened of sleeping without a nightlight than he is of anything on the Hemstocks' farm. The magic is accepted as a given, and through the narration of an adult remembering his thoughts as a child, a reader can really feel the disconnect between childhood and adulthood. Considering Gaiman's skill at writing children, it was a solid choice for the thematic heart of the book, and the best lines and most memorable parts tie very strongly to this idea. The Ocean at the End of the Lane is not a children's book, but it is a book about the nature of childhood, and connecting with that as an adult is its own sort of magic as a reader. It also helps ground the book in its fairy tale trappings, which is why despite the moon goddesses, shape-shifting footworm, or reality-eating vultures that populate the world, the book isn't really classified as a fantasy novel. It suggests that childhood is a time where fairy tales are accepted implicitly as true stories, and honestly looking back as an adult requires accepting that again. This concept is played very literally in the book up until the end, where it becomes much more metaphorical. When the vultures eat the narrator's heart and Letty saves him, there is a turning point in his experiences. The mother Hemstock makes his memories fade after returning him home, and he forgets about the literal fairy tales. In a sense, it's the point where the narrator begins to become an adult, and it only happens after he's lost a piece of his heart, and that missing piece transitions in the text to a general sense of emptiness the narrator feels, a sense of emptiness he's compelled to try and fill as an adult. As a result, the book suggests that the hole in the heart, a sense of discomfort and dissatisfaction that compels a person to create art or find love, is itself the catalyst of adulthood. This type of story is something Gaiman has touched on before, especially in the Graveyard Book and the screenplay for the film Mirror Mask. Both the book and the film cover the transitional period between childhood and adulthood, but what really separates these from The Ocean at the End of the Lane and makes it unique is how the transition is framed from the perspective of looking back on it as an adult. This makes it less a coming-of-age story and more a reflection on childhood as an experience, and how that experience differs from adulthood. Interestingly though, the book that has the most in common with The Ocean at the End of the Lane, Coraline, doesn't focus on this theme at all. It touches on ideas about growing up a little, and the movie expands on that further, but it isn't a primary or even secondary focus. Where Coraline and The Ocean at the End of the Lane truly match up is in a lot of the surface details, and in a secondary theme they both share. The most obvious connection is between Ursula Monkton, the human facade of Scarthatch of the Keep, a supernatural creature the Hemstocks call fleas, and the other mother in Coraline. It wouldn't be much of a stretch to argue that Ursula and the other mother are the same species. In both stories, they are an unwanted and supernatural mother figure who uses the assumed authority of adults to try and control the main characters. And in both stories, the true parents are removed from the protagonist's lives by them. Where Coraline had her mother and father literally removed by way of kidnapping, The Ocean at the End of the Lane's narrator lost his parents to Ursula's powers of persuasion, but both works pitted the main characters against their enemy without access to their parents for support. On the surface, this may seem to have the obvious storytelling goal of creating tension by way of removing a support structure. The danger for either child doesn't become real until they have no help from anyone in a position of authority and are forced to solve their problems on their own. While this is true for Coraline, it isn't true for the narrator. He has a support structure in the Hempstocks, and in fact is mostly a passive figure in the ocean at the end of the lane. Removing his parents does heighten the danger, so that storytelling beat isn't entirely averted, but the narrator isn't solving the problem. The Hempstocks are. He's less the hero of the book and more a witness. With that said, despite the surface mechanical reasoning behind the role of Ursula and the other mother not quite lining up, they are intrinsically connected another way. Removing the parents for a child protagonist can be accomplished in a number of ways for fiction. Whether they don't have parents in the first place, they're traveling through the world on their own, the parents are taken by force from them, or in some other way, it always raises the stakes for the plot at least a little bit. But in Coraline and the Ocean at the End of the Lane, the way Gaiman removes the parents from their respective stories highlights an identical secondary theme that both books share. They're both about dealing with neglect. Between the two, Coraline is in some ways more subtle and in other ways more blatant about it. During the time the other mother has her parents held captive, Coraline is forced to fend for herself in her house. The things she makes for food after being established as a bit of a picky eater, and the loneliness she faces during that time reflects a deeper meaning outside of the context of the book, and becomes a portrait of abandonment and isolation kids might face during an unhappy childhood. In The Ocean at the End of the Lane, food is also a struggle during the time that Ursula is in control as the live-in babysitter, and the narrator faces the same sort of loneliness and isolation, but it's all self-imposed. It feels less like an example of neglect and more like him dealing the best he can with a bad situation. However, Ursula's influence over his family, and especially his father, turns the situation into an abusive one. I still hold that a lot of the scenes between the narrator and his father fall flat without a strong emotional connection to either character. But the scene where Ursula has influenced his father into trying to drown him in the bathtub is a chilling one. The physical and psychological abuse recontextualizes the hunger and loneliness as symptoms of a wider-reaching and more generalized abuse. But even if those things weren't there, it would be hard to read the scene without it invoking the idea of broken homes and difficult childhoods. This secondary theme is used differently and has different purposes in Coraline compared to The Ocean at the End of the Lane, but their commonality makes these two companion books, in my opinion. In both cases, the time of direct abuse is fleeting, and comparing those times with the characters' lives before they happen has the interesting and perhaps unexpected effect of not only highlighting the good times from before that were lost, but also revealing the darker and maybe more long-term problems the characters had been facing all along. Both sets of parents are inattentive, which at times fosters curiosity and independence in the children, at times is annoying but benign, and at times is hurtful, not just in the moment but as a chronic problem. They both also don't shy away from moments of joy and satisfaction despite the neglect. Gaiman isn't looking to wallow in the suffering that children might go through. He suggests that difficult homes can have happiness while still giving them an unflinching look. What results is a pair of books with a deep, nuanced view of something unpleasant and utterly human. It might be tempting to tie this theme directly to the main themes in The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Even before the narrator meets the Hempstocks, he's an introverted loner and an avid reader who uses books as an escape from the real world. It could be easy to read the events with the Hempstocks and Ursula as a metaphorical escape from reality, a story told by the narrator to himself to explain a difficult and emotionally harmful period in his life. I think, however, that this interpretation falls short. It works well as part of the contextualization of the narrator's eaten heart as a metaphor. It makes more logical sense if the hole he's trying to fill as an adult just exists as a result of growing up. The difficult home life means he had to start growing up younger than most, and has a bit more of a hole to try and fill, but that the hole itself is a function of being a person. But this interpretation stops working as well when you start considering the Hempstocks themselves and the ocean on their property. They could be hand-waved as a tool of self-denial, and the magic that made the narrator forget could probably even be explained as post-traumatic stress disorder, if you wanted to explain it that way. But doing that ignores the other secondary themes the book plays with. It makes the book kind of shallow and just so, and maybe even a little preachy. It's the sort of interpretation that feels like someone pushed the big red pretentious button, and that doesn't sit well with the way the book reads. At the same time, it's hard to just reject the idea outright, especially considering the narrator's missing heart. I think the better interpretation is somewhere in the middle. For such a dreamlike fairy tale, it feels fitting in my opinion. It is all a metaphorical journey of growing up while dealing with neglect, and it is all something that actually happened, both at the same time. In the end, the narrator finds out he's returned and visited the Hempstocks farm several times before in his life, and has remembered and forgotten what happened each time. In those visits, he'd have moments of clarity and would find answers to questions that had been bothering him. He'd forget about the magic again, but those answers would stay with him, like those memories or toys or maybe letters stored at the bottom of a closet, dusted off when needed and put away again after. A metaphor for self-reflection and how the things we carry with us are always there whether we're thinking of them or not. And yet, despite that, the Hempstocks are still on their farm and Letty's still asleep in her ocean. When the narrator returns, he will remember again about the monster who followed him home. A metaphor for life and a literal fairy tale. Both and maybe neither at the same time. Sounds like a Gaiman novel to me. That wraps up my thoughts on The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I'll be back next time with another 2-part review, probably in a month or so. Until then, let me know what you thought of The Ocean at the End of the Lane. And hey, while you're at it, let me know what you think of this show so far. I'll probably be working on some kinks on how this works for a bit, so there might be some growing pains, and feedback would help a lot. Anyway, that's it for this one. TTFN.